I'm joined today by Robin Cogan. She is on the board of directors for the National Association of School Nurses. She's worked more than 20 years as a school nurse in the Camden School District in New Jersey. And she also teaches at Rutgers University in their school nurse certificate program. So Robin, thank you so much for being here today.
David, I'm so honored you invited me to your podcast. I have been following your work for so many years, and I just appreciate the efforts that you put into this unbelievably important program. I mean, I don't even know what to call it. You have really devoted your life to bringing an attention to school safety like no other. So I really thank you, and thank you for including the school nurse perspective, because you're right. We are often overlooked, but yet we have so much vital information and perspective. And I have many things to say about why we're overlooked and how that can change.
Right. Well, I have put the last 6.5 years into documenting every instance of gun violence on school property back to the 60s. I am a relative newcomer to the space of education and school safety, but you are not. You know all about this. So I'm really interested. Nursing is such a noble profession. School nursing is a sub-discipline in that I think a lot of people don't even realize is a career option. But it's, different from other clinical settings. It's probably a very rewarding job in a lot of ways. Can you just talk to me about how you came into nursing, and then once you were in nursing, what drew you to working in schools?
Yeah, so most school nurses, actually, we trend older. I have to say that. Most school nurses do not go right into school nursing right out of school. It really is a specialty independent practice. And to become an effective school nurse, you really have to have a strong clinical background. You have to have strong assessment skills, and you have to be wide-eyed and understand that you will be working with very few resources, mostly independently, in an environment that really does not understand the scope of your role or your practice. And so I came to school nursing, like most of my education, in a very circuitous way. I actually was an art therapist before I went back to school and became a nurse. I was always interested in psych. And when I became a nurse, I specialized in psych and substance use disorder. But I somehow ended up in case management, meandered my way to somehow ending up, and this is exactly how my career path has been. I ended up working for a railroad. And the railroad was taken over by a much bigger railroad. And so I had two small children at the time. I have twin girls, and my daughters wanted to go to overnight camp. So I had this kind of hiatus, this moment that I had some time off with pay after I lost my position. And we all went to camp together. And everybody I worked with was a school nurse. And I said, oh, that sounds like a great opportunity. And so that summer, I went to camp that September, and it was September of 2001. I had my job interview for Camden City Schools on September 12th, 2001. And I remember driving to that job interview thinking, isn't the world basically coming to an end? We were so, at that moment, it just, nothing seemed real. We were in such a surreal moment, which would be replicated so many years later with COVID, right? But here I was in Camden, and, I don't know if you know all of my history, but I have a very deep family history related to gun violence in that city. So for me to even choose that city was a deeply personal choice. And so they immediately offered me the job, and I began my career as a school nurse. And because unfortunately in school nursing, honestly, there's not a lot of room for upward mobility, I had to learn to grow, as I say, horizontally. So that's
why. Talk to me about, you're giving that snapshot. It's the Twin Towers have just fallen. It's post 9/11.
the day.
What was it like in the schools at that time? What was your biggest challenge just in day to day in the early 2000s?
It actually reminds me of COVID. We were very off kilter. No one knew where the future was going. We had just entered, the 2000s. Everything was new. And it was a terribly unfortunate way to enter into a new century. And at school at that time, I feel like now, in comparison to everything else that's happened, we were actually very naive and much more innocent, obviously, prior to 9/11 than we were after. But the 2 points, I guess, when we look at this 21st century, we're going to talk about 9/11, we're going to talk children, and we're going to talk about COVID. And we're not even a quarter of the way into the century, right? So I feel like our world experienced a huge, our country especially, and the rest of the world, experienced a huge collective trauma after 9/11. And that trauma has played out in school since then. Of course, Columbine happened in 99. So when we think about the mass school shootings, even though obviously there were many prior to that, that's kind of the pivotal one. So I've been a school nurse as long as we have had lockdown drills, as long as they've been mandatory, as long as we've had, and it's happened over time. It wasn't an immediate response. I think what's interesting is after 9/11, schools were told to identify their emergency action plans for a similar attack. Now, I happen to be in New Jersey. So if you remember, parts of North Jersey, schools were actually used, as the safe harbor for people who were literally walking over the Brooklyn Bridge, being taken over, across the Hudson.
Which is interesting because schools are these hubs of communities that have always been a place for the community in times of crisis.
Always.
When there's an evacuation, I was in New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina, and many of the shelters were in school gymnasiums. If you have any sort of emergency that happens where there are mass power outages or things like that in an area, it's usually the schools that are opened up. And they've been such an important hub of the community. But a lot of the emergency planning looks at the school as an island and doesn't reach to community members for their ability to help either. And that's something that I think is key to moving forward with safer campuses that are more resilient, that give students more options for what they can do during emergencies, is that community needs to be involved in every school's safety plan as well.
I agree with you so much. The community and the key people in the school who are there every day need to be included as well. There's, communities, health happens in community, healing happens in community. Community has to be part of coming up with solutions that work for that particular community. And if we've learned nothing from COVID, we left the community out of discussions regarding masking and vaccine and all these other things. And look where we are. I mean, we're so divided.
Absolutely. So then backing up a little bit, so about 10 years into your career as a school nurse is when Sandy Hook happened. And I think if we have to chart the shootings over time that had the biggest kind of policy impacts, Columbine changed response procedures, Sandy Hook put shootings into really the start of them becoming really a divided, highly political, highly cultural point. And how did they change? How did post Sandy Hook kind of change your perspective and the types of things that were happening in the schools in Camden, New Jersey?
So in my personal experience, I grew up with a father who survived a mass shooting. It was probably one of the first mass murders in the United States in Camden in 1949 when he was 12 years old. My father's entire family was killed, his mother, his father, his grandmother, and 10 other neighbors by a neighbor. And so when I always knew that life could change in an instant. My father's message to me always was know where you are, know where the exits are. Um, he used to have a saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. He was he was a loving man, but he was a very traumatized man. And so anytime there was any kind of mass shooting of any type, it impacted him very, very deeply. So yes, Sandy Hook, I mean, they were babies. They were, you know, kindergarten and first grade. They were babies. And that was the most devastating. I think for us, moving beyond that, if it's even possible, it was really kind of not just the beginning of active shooter drills, but people were paying attention to them more. Um, Columbine, we were tasked for creating emergency plans. And then 9/11, we had to create shelters in place. And then Sandy Hook, we began to look more deeply at active shooters. And
what was your role as the school nurse in that process? Were you in the room? Were you engaged?
None of us were in the room. And we're still not in the room. I put myself in the room because I can't sit back and watch this anymore, especially in 2018, when then my niece survived Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in Parkland, Florida. And I think for me personally, like when I look at my trajectory of advocacy, activism, whatever you want to call it, that's when I said to my sister and my niece, we have to solve this from a public health perspective. This law enforcement focus belongs, but it's not solving the root cause. We're not getting to the real issues, especially in school.
Well, it's interesting when you say, that it's a law enforcement centric approach, because in a lot of ways, hearing you talk, there are parallels between a school police officer and a school nurse. It's somebody who's not from the traditional academic and education perspective. It's somebody that likely worked in a different discipline within that field prior to ending up in a school, like in a municipal police department. Somebody works in patrol before there's an opportunity for them to be a school police officer in most cases. And then they're a person who is working by themselves in a lot of cases, sometimes covering multiple campuses. They might have their own set of management instead of the school principal. So they're in very many ways kind of a loner and an outsider within that school community. But they've been thrust into the center of all of this planning around school security and lockdowns and response now. How do you see
one thing about that though, David, because we don't have school police officers. There's many school districts that don't. They may have a security officer, but they are not a retired police officer. They are a young, actually not well paid for such an important job, kind of entry level position with maybe handcuffs. There are some schools, obviously different parts of the country, they're handling this very differently. But in Camden, we don't have police officers. Do we have a relationship with the police department? We do. I think it needs to be much more fluid, and there needs to be school nurses in these conversations. Even on a grander scale, when you look at what the White House just put out, and I am thrilled to know that the White House believes that we should be talking about safe storage in school, that directive was sent to superintendents and principals. It was not sent to school nurses.
So
I
on that,
what to have been in that. I mean, I even wrote to them and said, wait a minute, you missed a great opportunity here. This is our area of expertise. Don't leave us out, because guess what? My superintendent didn't know anything about that program. I'm still trying to get it into my school.
So back up a second here. We probably should have started with this. What are all the responsibilities that a school nurse has? Because everybody remembers having, a stomach ache in elementary school, and the school nurse is somewhere where you can go lie down for a minute, and if you're not feeling better, your parents pick you up. But That's probably the most experience that a lot of people have with the school nurse. What does a school nurse do every day and every week and every month?
Well, I guess you can ask, what doesn't the school nurse do every day and every week and every month? Because what we do is, we bridge health and education. We are we are that link. We are responsible for the health and the well-being of all the students, most of the staff, and even visitors in a building. And people do not realize the full scope of our practice. It is vast. And we in any given day, we can be first responder for a life-threatening emergency. We have Narcan in our schools. We have EpiPens in our schools. I mean, I can just give you the data around the percentage of students who never had a history of an allergic reaction. 25% of them will have their first anaphylaxis at school. There are so many moments that a school nurse being present is a life or death outcome. And so this is why it is so important to understand the scope, the full role of what school nurses do. I mean, we provide mental health support. Listen, even before COVID, 35% of our time was spent on mental health issues. Not just the daily tasks of, our mandatory screenings, which there are, we could have also, our ratios could be one school nurse to several thousand kids all by herself. It could be one school nurse to 6 buildings that aren't even near each other. And we are responsible for providing the health and safety for that school. Now, every state has a different workflow. Some states, a school nurse acts more as a consultant, and there are unlicensed assistive personnel in offices doing kind of the day-to-day. But in some schools where it's most effective, there is a certified school nurse in New Jersey in almost every single building. And that sounds great, except how about if it's a high school and there's 3,000 kids? We're doing sports physicals. We're taking care of emergencies, not to mention fights that break out in school, kids who are overdosing. We handle every single medical issue, whether it's small or large, anything that walks through our door. That's why every single day is different. And when we create what we think is a schedule for the day, it's really what interrupts us that is our true work. So we are care coordinators. We link our students up to insurance. We provide case management. We have to know all the resources in the areas where we're working. We deal with every social determinant of health, homelessness, food insecurities, families that are going through crises. Though we don't leave those things at home. And truthfully, neither do the teachers. So at this moment, honestly, we have post-COVID, if that's where we are, and not just post-COVID, but in a world where we feel really, truly unsafe many times at school, people are on edge. And I don't think we can underscore that enough. The sense of psychological and physical safety is not present in many school buildings right now.
And do you see that as a difference from the way that you felt back in the early 2000s and the way that students and staff members felt?
I see that as a difference as the escalation of the proliferation of guns everywhere and the escalation of school violence increases. We know that from basically, look at the last, 4 years, it's escalated so much. And we wouldn't have known that had you not kept that data and did that data mining.
Well, that was a big surprise for me too, because this project started in 2018 as an effort to better understand Parkland, to see what were the characteristics of that shooting. How do you stop planned attacks? But then you realize that 3 weeks before Parkland, 20 people were shot in Marshall County, Kentucky during
And
a planned
nobody
attack
was
at
talking
schools.
about it.
2 months after Parkland, 27 people were shot at Santa Fe High School. And that every single year, there are a couple of planned attacks, but almost every single day, there's a shooting on a campus. And it's almost always a fight that escalates. And when that fight escalates, if somebody's carrying a gun, and there seems to be a difference in the number of teenagers and even middle school students who are carrying guns habitually with them every day inside schools that is different from any other point in our history. What
From
do you see that
well,
in Camden, New Jersey?
I see. So in Camden itself, and I'm going to knock all over the place, we have not had an on-site school shooting. We have tremendous community violence. A student was killed last weekend, the weekend before. And, I've been trying to get things like Be Smart into our schools. I've been trying to get programs where we could do anonymous reporting. I've been working for years to bring these programs to our district. And there's this tremendous pushback in Camden, which has been known to have a very high community violence. And so what I've learned really through your work, David, is the cause of these school shootings is something that people do not realize, that escalation of disputes. People are no longer trying to resolve issues with words. They are going right to weapons. It is desperately fearful. And the other thing that I've learned that is really so bizarre to me is that if the vast majority of school shootings aren't even happening inside the actual classroom, why is that all we're training for then?
Yeah, 70% of the shootings in the last 10 years have taken place outside of the school building. Most often, yeah, the front of the school, the parking lot, and around the school's athletic facilities.
And then the other piece that I've learned that has really gotten my attention in recent weeks is the escalation of school shootings at graduation.
Yeah, and
In May, graduation. I mean, we're not out of school till June 25th. So
yeah, there have been 6 shootings so far this year. For the timestamp, it's May 28th at 4 p.m. So there may be some others before this makes it out. But yeah, what's surprising is the shootings at graduations, the 6 so far this year, and then there was one at a middle school end of the year award ceremony, were disputes between adult attendees that turned into shootings. And those, once shots are fired, everybody in the entire crowd is running. There's a heartbreaking quote from the Roosevelt High School graduation in Des Moines, Iowa, where a kid said, "I was just so happy that I'd made it through my entire career as a student without a shooting." And then there's the shooting during graduation. And in that case, it was the older brother of a student, and he had 3 guns with him because he was expecting there to be a problem with community violence when you had a lot of people from the community at this large graduation. And when I've been recording these incidents since the 60s, there were not shootings taking place at graduations frequently in the 70s and the 80s, the 90s, even in the early 2010s. Has been a change in the last couple of years with young kids and teenagers habitually carrying guns, and then adults, even though they're not allowed to, even though every school campus around the country, you're breaking a federal law to carry a gun at a school. People believe that they need to have a gun everywhere, and an argument turns into a shooting.
immediately, and it becomes lethal because of that, unfettered access to loaded weapons that are not stored.
Yeah,
I mean,
and not just
the guns
lethal.
being stolen out of cars. Isn't it like 3 times the amount right now? There's some astronomical data point about how many guns are now being stolen from cars because they're kept unsafely. So those community issues seep into school. It seeps into the culture of school. It seeps into people's sense of not feeling safe.
And
And
then talk to me about, you said a huge part of your job is providing psychological and counseling services to students. When there's a shooting at graduation and you have thousands of people that are exposed to the fear, when you have an unplanned lockdown, when there's a threat that's reported, I think that there was a pretty serious threat in your area just last week. What does that do to the school population, and how central are you as the school nurse, and how capable are you when there are that many people that have been traumatized to provide help to them?
Well, I think the saddest part of all of this is that we're not doing after action reports. We're not looking at the incident to see. I guess in my railroad background, I was the health services manager. Every time we had an incident, we would do a root cause analysis. We're not doing that for these events. We're not looking at what happened, let's say last week, when there was a really awful and pretty scary threat made on social media, but also that person sent the threat to school districts. And there was there was poor communication. And when there's poor communication, people make their stories up, or they'll go digging on the internet to find a snippet of something and it becomes something else. So the story then turned into, yes, they caught the person who also left his name and phone number and address, but that's besides the point. But then there was the other piece of that nobody believed it, and they thought that there was also an accomplice that they hadn't gotten. So these things leave marks in communities. People are shaken up. I was very shaken up.
And to provide context there, it was a post on social media, correct, where somebody said they have a rifle, they've written a manifesto, and they're planning to attack a certain number of undisclosed locations the next day.
And apparently he also reached out to some of the schools directly by email and said the same thing. Right. And so everyone handled it differently. There's charter schools in our city. They closed. They actually closed Thursday night. We didn't know anything about it until later in the morning on Friday. And then the communication just wasn't clear about what we should do. And I actually work in preschools. My schools weren't even notified. But by that point, the person had already been arrested. There should have been a clear statement. This is no longer a threat. We have resolved this issue. It just wasn't clearly communicated. And this is the disconnect maybe between the police and the school district, between the community and the school district. Schools are not an island unto themselves. Everything that happens in a community will find its way into school. And that nothing is more clear than that than during COVID, when there was this whole untruth about COVID not affecting kids. That was so erroneous. COVID definitely affected kids. Part of the problem is that what was happening in the community, we had and this happens often. We have rules at school that aren't followed at home. You know, that's a disconnect. For example, at school, we don't condone kids physically hitting each other. At home, a parent may say, don't you dare let anybody touch you. You make sure you get them back. But now, are you getting them back with a weapon because it's left unlocked? I mean, that's what it feels like is happening more and more.
I completely agree with you. Now, so we're in 2024 now. This school year is coming to a close. There has not been a lot of high profile coverage of shootings at schools, but there are actually a bunch of pretty significant incidents that I've shared information with you about. On the first day back from winter break in Perry, Iowa, about 30 miles outside of Des Moines, there was a student who had written extensively about school shootings, was in a Discord chat called School Massacre Planning, had made threats to other students because they were immediately aware of the situation as soon as it happened. They knew exactly who had committed the shooting and why. It was a kid who was extensively bullied. It looks like his younger sibling was enduring bullying as well. Student was able to bring a shotgun and a handgun into the school earlier in the morning. You know, not all school systems are the same. I think this is something people don't understand nationally. Your Camden, New Jersey, or New York schools are completely different from a school in rural Iowa, where kids might arrive at the school an hour early because there's a rural bus route that drops them off, and then the bus has to go, you know, to a second route. So he was there at this kind of soft time in the day before things are set up, before everybody's ready to go, and he opens fire in the hallway and kills a classmate, kills the school principal, wounded 7 others. And that just really didn't get any national attention. But it was exactly the case of not having support services, not having mental health services, not having an adult who was in touch with every student on a regular basis to find out what was going on. where do you see the school nurse or having a more robust healthcare and mental health infrastructure in the schools could help a situation like that?
Well, I do believe that school nurses have the pulse on what's happening in a building. And as we know, people leave clues way in advance. People leave clues sometimes years in advance. Sometimes these plannings happen over a good deal of time and other people are aware. And it's why we continue to have a culture of not sharing this information, not bringing these concerns forward. I personally think it's the language that we use, we continue to use, the law enforcement language and the like threat assessment language that is from Secret Service language, that if we would change the language to meet the place where we are trying to implement these policies and call it anything but a threat, because you're asking people to call somebody else's child a threat. You're asking people to accuse other people's children of being a threat. So there's the no snitch culture, which we have to fight against, but there's also people are afraid to come forward, I think, and accuse somebody else's child. And so I am a strong believer in that language the words have significant meaning. How are they being received? So can we call it a wellness check, a well-being check? I believe that school nurses, truthfully, are the chief wellness officers in their buildings, even if we don't have that title, because we do see those kids. There's been some interesting studies that have shown that, I don't have the data with me, but I know Megan Ranney was part of a very interesting study that looked at how many people, whether they were going to commit suicide or complete suicide with a gun, or use a gun for other nefarious things, that they had ER visits prior to their events. So that's what I'm saying. There's a path. Some of it is a pattern that you've identified, but we know that there are people that leave clues. And if we were more vigilant about speaking to each other and looking at this from more of a trauma focus than a law enforcement focus, I think we might have more success in schools helping these kids earlier.
And I completely agree on two different aspects of that. Part of it is there's community gun violence and targeted planned school shootings that both get lumped together.
Mhm.
A planned attack at a school is almost always committed by an actively suicidal current or recently former student at that school. It is a death of despair in a very violent public manner. Suicide prevention, crisis intervention, wellness checks can address that situation because it is a cry for help for the days and weeks and months. The person does that public act of suicide because they can't get help. They can't get anybody to pay attention to them. And if you have an adult who's trained, is a certified school nurse, is somebody who thinks of wellness first, they're going to notice that student who's really hurting to that point of killing themselves and others. In the community gun violence, if you have a fight that's escalating into a shooting, the kid is carrying a gun for a reason. The kid is carrying a gun because they don't feel safe. They feel victimized. They feel that there's this conflict that they can't resolve on their own, and it might get to the point where they think that they have to shoot somebody. That's also something that an adult that has the pulse of the student body, has the trust of the student body, I just think we don't pay enough attention to conflict resolution. That whether it's a fight that's going to turn into a shooting or somebody's planned attack, somebody wants help before that. And when they can't get any help, then they think the gun is going to be their only answer.
Right. And now with this unimaginable number of guns all around us, how do we live safely among them? And that's when I go out and talk about safe storage, I have landed on this space that I think people can agree, can we keep our children safe? That can be a collective action that no matter what side of this issue you're on, we want kids to be safe. We don't want gun violence to be the #1 cause of death of children and teens. So it's been kind of a message that I feel that people can hear. And that's what I've been focused on for a very long time, because in all the other areas of this work, it's the one that I think belongs in school, especially that safe storage education message with equipment, because that's the best idea. It's that idea of, a harm reduction model where we're providing education with equipment, not asking probing questions, not accusing anyone of anything, kind of just saying, I mean, imagine like at a back to school night, at a health fair, why aren't we having these things available?
I completely agree with you.
Right? It's not the third rail. It's a line, it's a life-saving line. I don't, it's changing the conversation. It's turning it on its head. And that's why, I mean, as a school nurse, it's the public health view of where we are, what can we do from a public health perspective. Of course, we have to know the full scope of the problem. And David, your work has given us this body of data that is so, you have identified and so many different issues that can be addressed through additional research. Just the escalation of dispute issue. We know when something is not resolved at school, it leaves, goes into the community gets even more angry about it and brings it back to school. I have seen that happen in my own building time and time again. Kids are fighting about something, then family members get involved, then they come back to school to go to get the other people involved. And before you know it, we have a tragedy.
So unfortunately, my data collection has shown that there's a dramatic rise year over year. We're in a different pattern now. There are 350 shootings at schools last year. We're on pace to have that many shootings occur again this year. 5 years from now, if you could have any resources, if you could have additional staff, additional training, what would your vision be from your perspective as a school nurse to make a dent in that curve, to turn this problem in the other direction if you had unlimited resources to do it?
So in my deepest dreams and of what I could design, I would want to have a health services team in every school, not a solo nurse trying to dig through all of this by herself. We need to work in a team. And who would be on that team? It would be the number of school nurses to meet the need of the population and the acuity. So it could be 2 certified school nurses with a social worker, with a school psychologist, with someone who really, a behavioralist who really understands trauma. We would be working on healing-centered engagement with our kids instead of unnecessarily, and people may not agree with this, but this sense of, kick the problem out, shove the problem under the rug, don't talk about it, don't tell the truth about the bullying that's really going on in your school, because that is rampant. They have these harassment, intimidation, and bullying laws, but they're self-reports. So are they really true? Are they really true? I don't believe that they are. And so we have to deal with what is. Kids are not learning how to resolve issues, even small issues, because adults are not showing them. They are not mirroring how to live in civil society. We have an uncivilized society right now. And the more guns we have floating around, free floating, the littlest sense of disrespect can become a lethal attack.
Yeah. And it's not just 17 and 18-year-olds, it's 14-year-olds.
It's a 6-year-old
It's 12-year-olds, yeah.
The 6-year-old who shot his first grade teacher. That was so predictable, so preventable. And that's it. These things are predictable, therefore they're preventable. We're just not working on the prevention side enough. And we're working in these, this belongs to law enforcement. This teeny little piece belongs to school, but no, let's not include the school nurses because there's not enough of them and we don't really know what they do anyway. Well, that has got to end. And I really hope one day when I go to the White House, I can say, hey, think of us. I mean, we're here on the ground. Schools are reunification centers, for God's sake, after school shootings, right? Schools are that place where students need to feel safe. And I remember during COVID, I had a fight with, it was an on-air fight with someone in the New Jersey legislature, because they were talking about how we had to keep all the windows and all the doors open during school because we have old buildings and we don't have good air circulation. And I said, excuse me, we have to lock all the doors and lock all the windows because we have community violence. Well, he said, don't bring guns into this. And I said, I have to bring guns into this, and then just a few days later, a Sandy Hook mom texted me in the middle of the night. Well, she sent me a private message on Twitter, and we've become friends. She knew me as the school nurse who talked about gun violence, and she said, Robin, I only have one child left. She lost her daughter. Her daughter died in Sandy Hook. Her daughter was 6, her son was 8. She said, I only have one child left. He was turning 17. What should I do about sending him back to school? And I remember thinking, I was having this tremendous disconnect in my mind about safety, that COVID was bringing up all the issues around school safety and the lack of school safety with guns, because it was invisible, just like the guns were invisible. They came out of nowhere, right? And it was that sense of, yes, these things are connected, and the connection is safety. How do we bring safety back to our most sacred spaces? Schools, libraries, front porches, grocery stores, places of worship. All these places have been invaded. Concerts. I mean, I could go on and on, right?
Yeah, I completely
Fourth
agree
of
with
July parade, Super Bowl parade. I mean, and I am a new grandmom, David. I have a little 6-month-old baby, my daughter and son-in-law. Her name is Nora. And I have never been more dedicated to this work. I've always been dedicated, but since that little girl came into this world, I thought, we have enough history of trauma in our own family, of 2 mass shootings over 3 generations, and the trauma that caused all the other generations and the kids. It has to be resolved.
Yeah, we have to turn this trend around, because unfortunately, there's 60 million kids in school at 100,000 public school campuses, another 30,000 private school campuses. From talking to experts in this industry, a lot of people believe that there are teenagers carrying guns in almost every school in the country, almost every day.
Almost every day.
And we could have, there were 350 shootings last year. If this trend doesn't turn around, there could be 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 shootings that are happening at schools every year, because those mirror the rates of community gun violence in some of these areas.
Then when we bring more guns into school, because you're arming teachers who have no business having a gun at school, school is a boiling pot on a good day. It is a boiling pot. To have a teacher, or even, an untrained security guard with a gun, I just can't even imagine the terror that could happen. I mean, kids have already found guns left in bathrooms that were loaded by teachers who left them, or security that left them. We cannot accept that as normal.
Yeah.
That's so reactive. That is not prevention.
Yeah. And that's the point that I hit over and over, and get out of here on this. When a student brings a gun to campus, in so many ways, it's already too late.
Too late.
We've failed to identify the problem. We've failed to identify the warning signs. We've failed to make the different steps in risk reduction to make sure that a young child or teenager can't carry around a deadly weapon. All of those elements have already failed once that gun's on the campus. And we're putting so much effort into what to do after the shot is fired.
Always.
But for a fraction of that cost, we can prevent a lot of these incidents before they ever happen. And not only preventing the school shooting, the school nurse, people that are crisis and wellness focused professionals in the schools can be helping with drug abuse, with physical abuse, with bullying, with suicidal ideation, with mental health, with
Anxiety.
all of these problems.
Right, all the things we see, whatever people carry in their invisible backpacks into that building. And the adults are carrying the same kind of trauma. So when you have a dysregulated adult and you're not addressing that, they cannot help a dysregulated child. And that to me is one of the keys here. Are our adults okay? Are our kids okay? Right now, that answer is clearly no.
And you've got the solution, and that is having a trained care team in every school across the country. It's attainable. There are the resources available to do this. If we wanted to do it, it would be an incredible job growth program, 100,000 schools. If you had a handful of trained medical providers in them, those are excellent jobs. Those are fulfilling jobs. If people have all of the training and resources to excel in those careers, they can do really meaningful, high impact work that's going to benefit people for the rest of their lives. So this was the Back to School Shooting podcast. Robin Cogan is the Relentless School Nurse. I forgot to throw that in the middle. She has a phenomenal blog. Follow her on social media. She is a voice of reason and a very unique perspective that we need to include in every single discussion of school safety, because a nurse is there to help people in every situation, in every context, from every background. If you have a problem, a nurse will help you. And so let's put more of those nurses, more of those helpful people into schools, because it can cause no harm. And it may have a profound impact on a better future in this country. So thank you so much for your service across your career, Robin, and for being here today.
Thank you so much, David. Can I say one more thing about
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the most intriguing things about your work to me is that you count every single time a gun is shot at a school, whether it is morning, night, weekend, holiday. And I can't tell you how powerful that is, because the fact that you count that, you are acknowledging that schools are sacred spaces, that when that happens, that sacred space is being impacted, and that impact lasts. It vibrates. It doesn't go away. It doesn't matter if the school was closed. That was our safe space. So I know sometimes you get pushback about that, but you have great answers to why you do what you do. And I just have the highest regard for your work. And thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Absolutely. We've got a commitment to make those sacred spaces safe again, and we're going to keep working towards that.